Welcome back everyone. My name is Sagar and in this video we are going to learn everything about functions in Java. So what are functions? In the layman terms we can just say the function is like a work that can be done by any object. So suppose for an example if we have a washing machine. So washing machine is an object, right? And what are the functions of a washing machine? It can wash your clothes, it can also dry your clothes. So there are two functions of a washing machine, right? And suppose for some another example, if we have a printer, so printer is also an object, and printer is an object of printer class. Like it can have different properties. We just learned about classes and object in our previous video. So what is the function of a printer? It can just take input as a document or something else, and it can output us the printed value, or we can just say printed page. So that is the function of a printer. So how can we add this thing in our code? First of all, we have to just create a class. So I will create a class that is printer, and we have to create an object of that class. And let me just do this thing here. So I will create a printer object, printer, that is p, and new printer object. And after that we have to perform some function here. So how can we create a function of this printer class? So we have to define it here inside the block of this printer class. So what is the syntax that we have to use to create a function? So this is the syntax that I am writing here. So first of all we have to define here the return type of our function. So what value do this function return? That suppose in our example our printer return as a printed page. So that will be our return type. And if our function doesn't return us anything, then we can just specify a special type that is a void type. So void means nothing. So we will also see that. So first of all return type, and after that we have to define our function name. So function name, and after that these parentheses. And if we want to take an input in our function, so suppose we have to take an input of some document that we want to print and return, so we can just take that input in this parentheses. So suppose I want to take a string input, so I can just write it as this string name or a string doc. So we can just do it like this. And if we have multiple inputs, then I can also define them with this comma. So enter number or something else. And after these we can just define our block of our function. So using these curly braces I can just define the block, and inside this function, now let me just write here multi-line comment. So inside this function body, first of all I can write my logic. So first of all I will write my logic, and at the end I have to return some value. So after that I can just use this return keyword. So this is the syntax that we have to use to write some function. So let me just write it here. So suppose I don't want to return anything, so I will just use here the void return type. So this is a special keyword in Java, and void means nothing. We don't have to return anything. So this was our return type, and now we have to define our function name. So this function name should be logical, and that should be related to the work. So suppose in our printer class we have to print anything. So I will just say scan and print. So there we have to use the same naming convention that we were using while creating our variables, and after that these parentheses. And suppose we don't want to take any inputs here, so these parentheses will be empty, and after that our method body. So after this, now I have to define some logic inside this method body, and at last I have to return something. But what does this function return? It returns nothing, and we can just write it this. So this is the optional thing, that when your function is a void, so either you can just write this return as it is, and you even don't need to write this. So now we have to write some logic. Suppose I am writing here some print statement. So I will print here scanning and printing. So suppose this is the thing that our function will do, and I will just call this function using this printer object. So p dot scan and print, and let me just run this thing now. So now we will just print this thing, scanning and printing, and that is the function of our printer. And you can see we are not doing anything in our main method. So the only thing that we are doing in our main method is we are just calling this printer object dot scan and print, and it is just doing the task. So you can just define more logic here. Suppose you want to do some calculation or something else, so you can just do it here. That is the task of your printer function. So we have to create our functions when we have to write some reusable code in our program. So we don't have to specify every time that how to scan and how to print. So we just have to write it one time here inside this block. So that after explaining one time to our printer that this is the step that you have to follow if you want to scan and print anything. So we don't have to specify every time. So what we can do is we can just do this thing, scan and print. And suppose I want to pass here some parameters. So suppose I want to print 10 objects. So I will just run here a loop from 0 to 10. 0 to 9. So what I will do is I will just do this thing in a loop, and I will also pass here a parameter now. So now this time when I am calling the function, so that means this is called as function invoking, and I am calling it. So that means when I'm using the object to call the function, so this is called as function calling, and I have to now pass here an argument. So the argument will be this integer value, and I now have to pass this parameter here. So whenever you are defining your function, so that means we have to now write here a parameter. So this will take an integer as a parameter. So you have to define it something like this. So this is your integer type and it is the variable name. So first of all, suppose I am writing here scanning and printing this object. So now when I try to run this, so it will just print 10 times. And this is the thing that we have to do. And this is our reusable part. So we don't have to write it every time when we are writing it here. So suppose I have to also do some calculation here. So what I will do is I will just change this value. So I will do is a plus plus. And after that we are just printing. So it will just print me 1 to 10. And you can see here, first of all, we are scanning and printing 1 and up to 10. So there is also this thing that you can see, this is our main method. And what is the method and how it is different from our function? So in some languages, you can just write your function outside of your class. So in Java, that is not possible. But suppose in Python and also in Kotlin, you can do this thing. So you can just define your function, suppose this outside of your any class. So this is not a valid thing in Java. So every time you have to define your function inside of a class, inside of any class. It can be your public class or it can be just a normal class. So then what is the difference between function and method? So if we are defining any method inside of a class, then that will be called as method of that class. And if we are defining any function outside of that class, then that will be normally a function. So in Java, there is no if else. We just cannot create our function outside of a class. So in Java, functions and methods are exactly same thing. So now let us just see this thing, this main method. So what is this public static? So this is nothing but an access modifier that we will just learn in our upcoming videos. So just currently don't focus on this thing. And after that, you can see this is void. So it is a return type that we just defined here. And suppose I also have to return here anything, suppose integer, and I will just return it here, int a. So return a. So that means whenever I am calling this function, so it is returning me a value, and now I can use this value in our main method. So that means whenever we are creating a function that can return us value, so we can just use that return value in our calling method. So we can just do here some another calculation. Suppose I am writing here sum, so it will be 0, and I can just use here the return value sum plus equal to. So this will just return me something. So this whole thing, not this p, but this method. So this whole thing, you can just see this thing in bracket. So this whole thing return as a value, and this is an integer type. So you can just see this is the integer type. So that's why we can just add that value to our sum, and at last you can also print the sum. So we were talking about this main method. So this is void. So it is the return type, and after that this main. So this main is the name of our main method, and after that we have some parameter that you already know. So this is a string array, and the name is args. And after that we have this method body. So every time when we have to execute some code, so we always have to write it in this main method body. So there are two types of method. The first one is that we just defined. So this is a type of user defined method that we just defined. And there are also some inbuilt methods, suppose in our scanner class. So we already used it a lot of time. So you can just see this is a scanner class, and we are just using here the constructor. So we will just learn about constructor in our next video. So here we can see we are just calling this nextInt method. So this is a method of our scanner class object, and we are just using this method, and it is returning us an integer value. So you know that we have not defined this nextInt method. It is given in this scanner class, which is a part of, you can see, java.util package. So there are some inbuilt methods, and we also saw some methods, some different inbuilt methods like this math class methods. So math dot, you can just see there are a lot of methods of this math class. So this maximum, that will tell us the maximum of two numbers, and that can be also long, they can also be float. So these are the parameters of that function. So after that, this abs function that will return us the absolute, and after that there are a lot of methods that we have in this math class. So these are inbuilt methods. So now let us just see what happens in our memory whenever we call a function. So you know there are two types of memory in Java, that is our heap memory and that is our stack. So what happens when we call a function? So just remember that thing, every time we call a function, it will be added to our call stack. So it will also consume some memory. So we have a separate call stack. So this is our stack, and if you don't know, stack is nothing but a data structure. Suppose for example, you can just place one book upon other. So this will be in the form of a stack. So this is our call stack that we can use for our function call. And what happens first? So first of all, we have this main method. So this main method will be added to our stack, and this is our main method here. And after this, what method are we calling? So we are calling this p dot scan and print. So we are calling this method. So first of all, we are calling it one time. So now this method will be added to our stack. So scan and print. So now this method will be added. And also remember that thing, that all the variables that we have inside this method will be only available in this method and not inside our main method. But if we have to return anything, then this will be returned in our calling function. Okay. So suppose in this scan and print method, we have some different variable. So suppose I am not writing here a, I am writing here number. So this number will be different from this I. Okay. So I can just write here number. So I am just returning this number in our calling function, and this number will be added to sum. And when I am passing this I inside of this scan and print, so this will be a pass by value. So I know that the value is, so value of I will be 1, value of I will be 0, 1, 2, 3, and something like this. But this will be not passed. So remember that thing, Java is always pass by value. So we will not pass the actual value. So we will not pass this I. So what we will pass? Then we will pass the copy of this I value. So here we are passing the I as 0, and there we are passing the copy. So this number is the copy of 0 value, right? So in our memory, there will be 2 zeros, and after that 2 ones, and then 2 twos, something like this. Okay. And when we are returning, so after returning, this function will end. So let me just write this number here also. So after this function ends, so what will happen? This will be removed from our call stack, and after that we have main method. So after this line, the execution of main method will continue. So that means when we are calling this method, so first this method will get executed. You can also see from our call stack that first this method will get executed, and after that the lower one. So first our this method will get executed, and after that we can continue this loop. So what happen after our main method ends? So it will be also removed from our call stack, and our call stack will be empty. So that means our function is complete executed. So let me also tell you more cool things about functions, that you can just write multiple functions with the same name. So you can just see I am writing 3 functions that have the same name, but they are showing error. That is not true. And that is because these functions are exact same, and any two functions should not be exact same, and this is just giving us a compilation error. And that is because how our compiler will know that either it have to select this function or this function. So our compiler will just get confused. So either we can just write their different name. I can just write here scan and print 1 2, but that is not a good practice. What we can do is we can just change their inputs, we can change their parameters. So suppose this first scan and print method don't have any parameters. So it have no parameter, and I will just define this number here, int number equal to 0. And after that, this scan and print second method have one parameter, and this third have two. So number 1 and number 2. And let me just write it here. So you can see now these things are valid. So this function name is also scan and print, and it returns as an integer, and this function name is same, and it also returns the same. So this is called as function overloading, and this is a part of our polymorphism that we will learn in our later videos. So just remember that thing, we can just overload our function something like this. So there is a difference between overriding and overloading. Don't confuse in this thing. We will also learn about that while we are learning about polymorphism. So overloading is a part of polymorphism, and overriding is a part of inheritance, and we will just learn that thing in detail. So here what we are doing, we are just creating the same functions with different parameters, and that is our example of function overloading. So after that, now our compiler can be sure what method do we have to call. So does our compiler have to call this method? No, this method is for no parameters, but we are passing here one parameter. So what our compiler will do, it will just find a method with the name scan and print which have one parameter. So this is the method, and we are also not calling this method. So this was a pretty straightforward example of function overloading, and we can also return a different value. You can just comment this thing, and this is also a valid thing, that function with the same name can also have different return type. But if we have the same function, suppose something like this function also have the same name, and it also have one parameter, and this function also have the same name and also one parameter. So this thing is not valid. This function overloading is not valid when we are talking about return types. This is only valid when we have different parameters. As you can see, they have the different return type, but that is not a valid case. How our function will know that what value do we have to return? So after that, let me just comment this thing, and now let us just talk about the scope of your function. So what is the scope? So scope is something like this, that is the boundaries up to which we can just access some variable. So what is the scope of this variable, this number variable? This number variable will be only accessible inside this block. So we have three kind of scopes. So let me just write here. The first one is our block scope. So we can just define a block inside this method itself. So this is now a block. So using this curly braces, now this is a block. And if I am writing some variable inside this, so int a equal to 0. So that means I cannot access this a variable outside of this block, because this a variable is defined in this block. So this block is the whole lifetime of this a variable. And if I am trying to, so if I am trying to access this a, so just you can just see there is an error now. And after this, our second type is this method scope. So that means if I am defining some variable, something like this, if I am defining this object, so this p is now accessible only inside this method, this main method, because it is defined in this main method. And if I am trying to access this outside of this method, so I can just define here a block inside my class. So this block, so you can just see this block is inside of my class and not my main method. And if I am trying to access this p, so you can just see I'm getting an error. And also one thing, that you can just use any variable anywhere inside the block of this main method. So either you have to also use it inside this block, so you can just access this p here. So let me just try here, print p. So this p is accessible inside this method, this block, and that is because this block itself is also defined in the scope of this main method. So that is why we can just access this p anywhere inside it. Okay. And after that, if we have to access this p before it is defined, so we just cannot do that. And that is because our compiler check all the lines one by one. That means our compiler works linearly. So first it will check this line and it will see either p is defined, no, p is not defined, so we just cannot use it here. So this was the second type of our scope. And the third one is our class scope. So that means if we are defining something in our class, then then that will be the property of our class. So suppose in this printer class I have this color. So this is now the property of this printer class, and that means I can just use this color everywhere inside of this class, also outside of this class by calling the object, by creating the object. So also one more thing, if I am defining it after this method, so still I can also use it. So if I am defining the color here, so this color is defined in the scope of this class. So it is inside the block of this class, and we can still use it inside this method. So I can just write here color. You can see here, this is not going to give any error. Okay, so that is because this is the property of our class. And here our compiler is not checking linearly, and that is because our compiler will only check our method, that first it have to execute this line, then this, then this. And when our compiler is checking that where is this color, so it will check the parent. So first of all it will check this printer, and you can see this color is defined in the printer class. So that is it about today. So you just learn some new concept. First of all, what is a method and what is a function. So this is one of the main confusion mostly beginner have. So if we are calling a method, then that should be inside of a class, and a function can be also outside of a class, but in Java they both are same. And after that, the second thing is argument and parameter. So this is another thing. So what is the argument? So argument is when we are passing some argument, when we are calling a function. So this will be now considered as an argument. And what is a parameter? So parameter will be considered as when we are defining some function. So this is now here a parameter, and this is now here an argument. And after that, we also learnt about function overloading. So function overloading means when we have some function but with a different number or different type of our parameters. So you can also define the same function just like this, and it just have the different type of your parameter. So suppose I am taking here a long number, and I have to now typecast it here long. So it should be integer here. So there you can see they have the different type of their parameter. Also they can have different number of parameters. So this is called as function overloading. And after that, we just learned about that Java is always passed by value, and that means we will just pass the copy of every variable that we are passing. And when we are passing some objects or even arrays, so let me just show you this thing. So suppose this is our first function and this is our second function, and suppose we have some array inside this function and we are calling this function. So inside of this function a, we are calling this function b. So this should be called here, and suppose when I'm calling this b function, I'm passing this array inside this. So this array will be inside here, but it will be the original array and not the copy of your array. And that is also because Java is always pass by value. And for our arrays, so if we have some array here, so suppose this is our, so suppose this is your array of size 3. So this is your array name, and we have to just pass the copy of this name. So this is a deep concept that we have to learn in our pass by value or pass by reference video. So we will just learn about that thing in detail. So after that, we just learned about scopes. So these are the things that we learned today, and that is it for today, everyone. If you like this video, then also do subscribe to our channel, and thank you for watching.